The Mastercard Indaba 2023, hosted at the Marriott Hotel in Johannesburg, South Africa in May, returned after taking a hiatus in 2019. This two-day event brought together thought leadership in the digital payments, cybersecurity, and payment industry technology. Keynote speakers and experts also discussed the launch of the Forbes Africa Whitepaper, showing the results of the informal market and the rise of the informal economy in South Africa. We caught up with Mark Elliott, the Vision President of Sub-Saharan Africa at Mastercard, about leveraging on Africa's vast opportunities it offers, despite its challenges, and how Mastercard plans to leverage these opportunities and foster innovation in the region, particularly in fintech partnerships and the digital transformation of SMEs.
When we think about innovation, obviously it's relevant to everybody in the ecosystem. And at Mastercard, what we're looking to do is to identify digitization opportunities, often by displacing cash. And ultimately, what we found is that the reach of some of the traditional players can be aided by the likes of fintechs. And so what the fintechs have done in some ways is actually lay that infrastructure for broader reach to the consumers that we want to include into the ecosystem. So the fintechs have played a very pivotal role in laying that infrastructure. I think the next layer of innovation, interestingly, will come on top of that infrastructure. Mastercard partners heavily with fintechs. We invest. We've got good examples of that, but also we have a Start Path program. And the Start Path program allows, started the company, got a little bit of traction, and then they get onto this program and we really give them that ability to network globally and fill their order book. So it's win-win. And we've got lots of examples across East, West and Southern Africa of companies joining the Start Path program and benefiting from that.
Security and safety are crucial in the growing of the digital economy. Can you elaborate on Mastercard's approach to ensuring businesses are protected from cyber threats and financial risks?
Sure. So, with the advent of what we all know, digital working from home sometimes, we've got to believe that businesses are more reliant on the devices that they use. And therefore, we need to think about how we can lean in and help them both at an identity level as well as a device level. And so what we've done as a company is we've invested heavily in solutions which can help with that. There are examples from a device perspective around behavioral, so actually biometrically detecting whether it is who you think it is, leveraging that device. So that's new data. We've picked up another business called Risk Recon. And what Risk Recon does is actually informs you about your cyber risk posture through the URL and on your browser window to actually understand the cyber risk posture of the people you're actually working with. So that starts to allow you to understand all kinds of things that you didn't know before, which maybe you could even include in the contracts that you strike with your suppliers. So you can see we start to move in different directions, but ultimately what we're trying to do is to protect the identity both of the individual but also in the device.
How does Mastercard engage with local partners to deliver relevant solutions for African businesses and communities?
Yeah, we've got a really good track record of working with local partners, and local partners can be anything from government. We just did a program with Lagos State Government where we're actually digitizing 150,000 buses in Lagos State. So that could be one example of a partner. Equally, we obviously work with fintechs, retailers, etc., to develop locally relevant solutions. Ultimately, it's a bit cliche, but what we've got to try and also understand is what the problem statement is and how we can help the consumer so that they get a better experience, and ultimately then we'll drive adoption, and that's what we all want, is we want to see that adoption and then we'll get scale.
The informal economy obviously plays a significant role in Sub-Saharan Africa. How does Mastercard plan to drive wider inclusion and shared value by supporting digital transformation in the sector?
Yeah, so we've got some really good examples, but I mean we have a segment-led approach. In this region, we tend to think about telco, retail, fintech, government as probably being, along with FI, being those main segments. But I'd like to share another example with you. So in the agri sector with farmers, you've got to remember 60% of the Africa is actually, that workforce is in farming. And therefore the opportunity is to take sustainable farming through to commercial farming and imagine the ripple effect you can then have into the broader GDP. It's quite transformational. So we developed something called Farm Pass, which is part of our umbrella Community Pass program. And what that allows is it allows the farmer actually, through a feature phone or a smartphone, to onboard into that, have access to the buyers on one side so that they can no longer work through multiple middlemen, but also they can have access to the agri providers who can help them at different stages of the harvesting. And ultimately that creates a data pool then which can help with credit lending and develop more refined scorecards for the banks to lend at more competitive rates. So there you can see a great example of how we've looked at a cash opportunity. And we've kind of come up with a platform concept. We've organized the ecosystem, and ultimately we hope to elevate the farmers and help the broader economy. And that's really, I suppose, a good example of how we'll do it across all segments with a heavy focus on SME in places like South Africa.
And just finally, inclusivity is key to sustainable growth. What is Mastercard's approach when it comes to empowering women-led businesses and promoting diversity within African economies and workplaces?
Yeah, so at a global level, we like to always have some KPIs. KPIs always help the focus. And at a global level, we said we want to have 50 million new SMEs into as part of the Mastercard world. And specifically, we've said 25 million women SMEs. And so what we're doing is we are ensuring that we develop solutions which are fit for women-led businesses. We've made some really good strides just in the last couple of months with how we're bundling solutions, so not just on the issuing side, but also on the acquiring side, so that businesses can be successful. And that means ultimately that we need to rely on that device, because the device can be so powerful in terms of a more inclusive way to accept payments, but also then how can you ensure that you have leverage that device to market to your customers in a more effective way. So we're doing all kinds of solutioning and layering our services on top of the old school solutioning to ensure that SME is more successful and grows their business.
Mastercard and Forbes Africa presented the Informal Economy Whitepaper at the Mastercard Indaba, showcasing the rise in this sector. We spoke to Gabriel Swanepoel, Country Manager of Southern Africa for Mastercard, about the study and why it was conducted.
So in South Africa, there are approximately 3.3 million SME that operate within the small, micro and medium enterprises space in South Africa, which provides a large part of the broader economic activity within the country. But it's a community that's not necessarily digitized, that we don't understand the attitudes necessarily, we don't understand or can articulate the nuances around the operating environments within that space. And this particular study was a focus to understand that environment a little bit better, be able to articulate what the problem and needs are within those communities, and start having a conversation to see how we can solve for and bring those businesses into the formal economy.
Some interesting insights coming from the paper, revealing that South Africa's informal economy is showing signs of movement to switch away from cash. What does that mean?
I think we need to be realistic in terms of the immediacy of cash. We all understand cash, it's tangible, there's immediate gratification around it. And so its ubiquity has been part of the human condition for as long as we can remember. But I think what's important to notice is that we are operating in more complex times, and cash sometimes presents security concerns. It can be lost. You don't necessarily have proof of payment if it is for the payment of goods and services. And so I think that the perception around cash is changing in the sense that digitized payments can in many cases bolster the value that it provides to the consumer and address some of those issues that I mentioned earlier.
Okay. And consumers in the informal sectors, as you say, still using cash, but the perception of cash convenience is declining. Can you elaborate further on this?
So I think there was a very interesting thing that we saw happening in the times of COVID, where there was a significant increase in the amount of electronic transactions that we see, and mainly due to people not being able to travel, as it were, people being further away from ATMs to withdraw cash, which necessitated a little bit of a change in behavior. And as those behaviors have changed, we now see that 65% of people that have moved to digital types of payment instruments are actually comfortable to stay within that space and to keep on using it. And I think what we'll see is a continued proliferation of digital transactions where we have actually deployed infrastructure into that merchant environment that can facilitate those payments.
The financial behavior of the informal sector, SMMEs, indicating the need for simpler solutions. How will this be achieved?
So I think in the past, if we had a conversation around electronic payments 10 or 15 years ago, all of the processing capability really resided within the merchant space. So you had to have a very expensive point of sale device that was often rented from a bank or a financial institution. And that didn't necessarily translate into a viable option for the small and micro enterprises environment. But with the ubiquitous nature of mobile phones and the way that smartphones have proliferated our lives, it's now very easy to facilitate a payment using your own device. And so when we think about that enablement factor within the informal economy, it can very easily be achieved both through things as simple as deploying a QR code within that virtual environment that a customer can scan and make payments. And it also translates then into other technologies that Mastercard has got, like Tap on Phone, for example.
Gaurang Shah, Executive Vice President of Product and Engineering for the Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa, delivered his presentation on the future of payments and the next economy and how innovations will reshape commerce. We caught up with him to get some key insights to this and key trends that are shaping the payments landscape.
Yeah, see, the biggest thing that has happened in the last 10 years is we are digitizing everything. And that got accelerated many times over with the pandemic because that was the need in the market. What it's doing is generating unprecedented amount of data. And probably data is the underlying thing that is changing everything, that is powering everything that we are seeing. And like our CEO says, data is the new oil. Now, within the data, what it is impacting, the three broader areas we are seeing the biggest change happening, that we are seeing the trends in that, and that will reshape the way the commerce is done over the next decade. Those three areas is, one is reimagining the money and how do we exchange the value. Is it just, and how do we extend the concept of a single currency into multi-token networks. The second one is about the new intelligence or a connected intelligence, and how the world of digital and physical and experiences within that are going to reshape to enable an consumer experience which is very intuitive, seamless, and very heavily data driven, what we call hyper personalization.
Gaurang, you mentioned this and touched on it a bit before, the issue around sustainability, but perhaps any further thoughts that you'd like to add, just in terms of the fact that everything in life right now is increasingly reminding us of the need to practice sustainable business. And as I said, you mentioned this, that it does, in a sense, cross over to the new economy that you mentioned. So it goes without saying, I mean, sustainability is the core of everything that we'll be doing now and in future.
So we have a slogan in Mastercard, which is doing well by doing good. And it's not a slogan on our presentation. It's taken time, but it's there in our fabric, how we operate. And it's coming from a principle that consumers value, and consumers are a lot more conscious about their environment, about the social impacts around them. And they value interacting with those organizations which put which put these as a primary agenda, and that drives competitive advantage, that drives sustainability. And hence it's a win-win. In in the past, it was seen as a corporate social responsibility. Hence, it wasn't a win-win. If I need to keep aside 2% of my revenue as a CSR, that's a win-lose because I don't win anything because I'm just doing as a philanthropy. It is now getting into the fabric of doing business and the business models because consumers are choosing to work within organizations which put this as their primary within their narrative, and you're responsible for it. So that's what we are seeing, and the consumers are allowing us to make it a sustainable model, a win-win model, and that's what we are beginning to see. And the two biggest areas within that, which we as an organization are heavily focused on, one is about financial inclusion, bringing the underbanked consumers and SME. And you think about Africa, probably 80% of any market's GDPs are driven by the SME sector. How do we bring them into the financial inclusion, into what I call the credit inclusion? Because they want to sell more, but they can't sell more if they can't buy more, and they don't have money to buy more. And 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 that's what we are trying to enable with this added data and digitization. It does two things: it gives more information, and second, it reduces the cost of operating at a lower ticket size, let's say credits. So that is one thing. Second, the environmental impact. And the number one thing that I have realized in the last 5 years, as we have been focusing about it, is we have to create the awareness. It's not that people do not want to do that. A lot of people are aware. One of the research shows that up to 15% of the consumers make choices in favor of the organizations which is environmental responsible versus who are not. And they make those conscious decisions. But the number one thing is, how do you create the consumer awareness of the impact that you have when you make certain decisions? Like I was giving you the example. If I go to the work on cycle versus I go to the work in a car versus a public transport like a train, I need to understand the impact it creates. If I'm not aware, I can't do much about it. So that is number one thing. How do you create awareness? And second, how do you allow and give people the tools to offset those carbon footprints? See, I don't see that in the next 5 to 10 years we will be in an environment where you leave a zero carbon footprint in your day-to-day life. But where we want to get into, one, reduce it as much as possible, but lead to a net zero carbon emission. Meaning, if I do something and left some carbon footprint, what do I do to offset that and give back to the environment? So it is coming back from that, but the core and the heart of it is doing well by doing good and getting the ESG agenda within the business models. That's the only way to move forward.
With the explosion of the digital economy, cybersecurity is becoming more and more essential, and no one knows that more than Dr. J, Senior Vice President and Deputy Chief Information Security Officer at Mastercard. We met up with Dr. J to get her insights on the key areas businesses should prioritize to mitigate risk and ensure a secure digital future.
I think of this in three areas. There's the infrastructure piece, that's all of your technology. There's the email and web piece. Out of 230 million detected threats, 219 million of them were email related. So that is your interface between you. That's the connective tissue between you, the customer, the partner, the business. That's the way we kind of communicate with each other. So that's really, really important. And then the last one, the third one, I think about is partnerships, our third-party partners, our fourth party. A lot of times we call them nth party, like the number N, because that partnership, that number can go on and on and on and on. And those are downstream effects. So if you have a partner that's a partner of another partner, and they get breached, that ends up having some upstream impacts eventually. So I look at it in those three areas: your infrastructure, your web, your email, and then your third party or your partner risks.
Now, in your presentation as well, you highlighted the significance that technology, tactics, and even talents play in addressing cybersecurity. Can you briefly explain the role of each of these elements and how it strengthens a company's security?
Sure. You know, your technology, it really goes right back to what I was just talking about. The infrastructure, your email and web, that has to be very, very secure. You have to have a knowledge of where your assets are. How are you controlling those assets from a security perspective? Super, super, super important. When I think about, so that's just technology, the tactics. These are how. The technology is the what. The tactics are the how. How are you protecting? What security controls are you using? What tactics are the adversary using against you? You know, one of the things I've learned just throughout my journey is the tactics can be a little bit different. The methods, the technology that the adversary is using against us ends up being the same, but sometimes their tactics are different. We have to know what their tactics are against us so we can tune ourselves to be able to protect ourselves against those. So that's the tactics. The last piece is the talent. The richness of all organizations are the people that work in it. And we call this the insider threat because a lot of times the adversary is using us, using and harping on our heartstrings, pulling on us to, our ability to trust, pulling that when you send me an email, I'm going to believe that it's really, really you. We have to make sure now that we are training our talent just to be able to acknowledge, hey, this is a threat, this is a risk to us, and that everybody is on the front line. Cybersecurity is just not just the focus of the cybersecurity organization, but it's also the focus of everyone in the company because we're all on the front line, we're all receiving information. We all have to make sure we verify, we know who we're talking to. So our talent and being able to train that talent to think like that is really, really important. So I talk about technology, tactics, and talent. Those are my 3 T's.
Speaking on the threat models and the motives behind these attacks, can you shed some light on these threats and how businesses can better prepare themselves to protect themselves against attacks other than the talent you just spoke about?
So, one common threat model that I'm thinking about is malware as a service. Malware, of course, we started out with antivirus, right? It's gotten worse and bigger and bigger and bigger. The adversary now is not just doing, not just sending one person. It's a load of malware being sent all across the company. And all you need is just one person to click an email, and now the entire company has, is going through some type of incident. Malware as a service is going to be super, super important because on the dark web, that makes it relatively easy for anyone with modest level of skills to be able to now impact an entire organization. We have to think about that as we think about our threat models. We have to think about now where we are most impacted. I talk a lot about spear phishing. My goodness, that is going to continue to get more and more and more sophisticated. When you think about our devices, the Internet of Things, these are all of these devices that we have that weren't initially built to be smart. So now we have all of these smart devices, these Internet of Things devices, everything is connected. You'll start hearing, you've heard of cars that are now able to self-drive. That is increasing the threat profile. That is increasing what our threat landscape looks like. And so we have to really be smart about the controls we put in place, making sure we know, even on our smartphones, when we get new updates, little do we know some of our applications are updating to say, turn this on, turn on your GPS tracking, turn on your location services, turn off this privacy control. You have to sometimes go and double click. I do it very often to make sure that all of the controls are set to what I want them to be set for. So they're personal controls because we have a lot of Internet of Things devices that now permeate into the workplace. Things that we thought were personally ours that, this is just mine, Well, now we're storing company data on our personal devices. You know what I mean? If you have a cell phone and your company is using a BYOD device, a bring your own device, which means you can take your own cell phone and have your company email on it. Now my company email is on my personal cell phone, and I have to make sure the controls are there for that. So when I think about Internet of Things, oh my goodness, the more things we want connected, the more convenience we want, the more comfortable we want to be in interacting and engaging, the more we have to make sure those security controls are tight and intact so that we are protected.
And that surely impacts when you want to do cross-border payments of any sorts.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, Mastercard has also made several acquisitions in the cybersecurity space, such as Risk Recon, Ethoca, New Data Security. How have these acquisitions strengthened Mastercard cybersecurity to start off with, and how businesses stay secure in an increasing connected world?
So we look at ourselves, Mastercard, as the core of trust. You know, even before cybersecurity became a really big topic, Mastercard was the core of trust, because you have to trust that when you use your card for payments, when you use a Mastercard rail for payments, that is going to happen. That transaction is going to go through. You're not going to have any issue. So we've had already embedded cybersecurity things that we were using, tools that we were using, and we said, you know what? With cybersecurity becoming, much bigger, we have to make sure that we share some of our secret sauce with the world. And so this has been a great opportunity for us as we, acquire other companies and we use them in our own spaces to help protect Mastercard. We're trying to teach others and be really a participant in the community. I like to always say, if you're not participating, then you're being impacted. We don't want people to be impacted by cybersecurity. We want you to participate in cybersecurity. So our acquisitions like Risk Recon, we've got Baffin Bay, which now is an AI-generated tool that we're rolling into Risk Recon. These are tools that we've used and are using to help with identity, with verification, to make sure that we're doing the right things in terms of handling data, securing data and data insights. Well, that information and the way we do that should be shared with everyone else so that you all can be prepared to use it in the same way.